Back when Hollywood sparkled with glamour, some stars never said, "I do." Why? Hidden loves, scandalous affairs, or just married to their art? Let's dive into the wild, untold stories of Tinseltown's eternal bachelors and spinsters. Greta Garbo. Let's kick things off with the original Hollywood enigma, Greta Garbo. Imagine a woman so magnetic she could silence a room just by walking into it. Garbo was that star. Born in Sweden, she stormed Hollywood in the 1920s with her smoldering eyes and a voice that sounded like velvet dipped in mystery. But here's the twist. While her characters often fell passionately in love on screen, off-screen, marriage was a hard pass. Garbo's most famous line, "I want to be alone," became her life motto, but she later clarified, "I never said, I want to be alone. I said, I want to be let alone." Big difference. She dodged proposals like they were paparazzi, including one from her Flesh and the Devil co-star John Gilbert. Rumor has it she even hid in a bathroom to avoid his marriage ultimatum. For Garbo, love meant losing control, and she'd rather walk barefoot on broken glass than let a man dictate her life. After retiring at 36, she spent decades wandering New York City in disguise, a ghost of her own legend, Howard Hughes. Let's talk about Howard Hughes, the original billionaire chaos gremlin. A Texas oil heir turned Hollywood producer, aviation pioneer, and full-time lunatic, Hughes didn't just break boundaries, he set them on fire and laughed as they smoldered. This guy dated Katharine Hepburn, designed a custom underwire bra for Jane Russell in The Outlaw to highlight her assets, and once crashed a prototype plane into a Beverly Hills neighborhood just to see if he could walk away. Spoiler: he did. Marriage? Hughes treated it like a tax form, something to avoid at all costs. When Jean Harlow's mom nagged him about marrying her daughter, he handed her a blank check and drawled, "Fill in the number, darlin'." She wrote $1 million. He never paid. Why? Because Hughes's true romance was with chaos. He built the Spruce Goose, the largest plane of its time, just to prove critics wrong. He bought RKO Pictures, then let it rot while he hid in screening rooms, obsessively rearranging sugar cubes. By the 1950s, his germophobia spiraled. He stored urine in jars, wore tissue boxes as shoes, and hired finger monitors to ensure no one touched him. In his final years, holed up in a Las Vegas penthouse, he resembled a ghost, long nails, an unkempt beard, surviving on chocolate bars and milk. Hughes didn't need a wife. He had his demons, his blueprints, and the intoxicating thrill of outrunning his own madness. Clifton Webb. Clifton Webb was a Broadway song and dance man turned Hollywood's favorite sarcastic snob, is stealing every scene in Laura as the acid-tongued columnist Waldo Lydecker. With his crisp suits and withering one-liners, Webb became the go-to guy for playing insufferable elitists. But behind that razor-sharp persona, a mama's boy who never left the nest, Webb lived with his mother, Maybelle, for his entire life. When she died at 91, he was 71 years old and utterly lost. "Why marry?" he'd smirk. "Mother irons my socks and hates my girlfriends." But the truth was murkier. Webb was gay in an era when that word was only whispered in dark corners. On his deathbed in 1966, Webb, ever the loyal son, gasped, "I'm coming, Mama," as if she'd been waiting with a martini and a lecture. His story isn't just about repression. It's about the absurd lengths people went to hide their truths in Hollywood's golden cage. Agnes Moorehead. Agnes Moorehead wasn't just the witch from Bewitched. She was a 4-time Oscar nominee with a voice that could cut glass. But while her on-screen characters schemed and cackled, Agnes lived a quiet, unconventional life. Behind the scenes, Moorehead was a master of reinvention. She dazzled as the fragile Aunt Fanny in Meet Me in St. Louis and terrified audiences as the delusional mother in Hush, Hush, Sweet Charlotte. Yet her most enduring role was off-camera, half of Hollywood's worst-kept secret. For 40 years, she shared a sprawling California estate with her secretary, Eleanor Scott, a former dancer turned constant companion. Together, they adopted a son, Sean, threw legendary parties attended by the likes of Bette Davis, and traveled the globe. To nosy reporters, Agnes shrugged. Eleanor is my rock. Why complicate things with labels? But let's read between the lines. In the 1940s, same-sex relationships were buried under terms like confirmed bachelor or Boston marriage, a polite fiction for queer couples. Moorhead, a devout Christian Scientist, never publicly acknowledged the truth, but her friends knew the score. Agnes lived exactly how she wanted, said co-star Debbie Reynolds. She just let the gossip columnists think they knew her. When she died in 1974, her obituaries praised her career, not her courage. But today, Agnes is celebrated as a trailblazer who proved you didn't need a man or society's approval to live a life full of love, art, and fabulous pantsuits. Ramon Novarro. Ramon Novarro was the 1920s heartthrob who made audiences swoon in Ben-Hur. With his smoldering looks and charm, he was Hollywood's first Latin leading man. But behind the scenes, Novarro was trapped in a double life. Born into a devout Mexican Catholic family, Novarro's faith clashed violently with his desires. He quietly romanced men like Hollywood columnist Herbert Howe and director Louis Stone, but guilt gnawed at him. I am a sinner, he confessed to priests, begging for absolution. Yet the studio machine demanded he play the Latin lover, flirting with starlets on magazine covers while dodging tabloid scandals. By the 1930s, his career faded as talkies replaced silence, and his inner turmoil spiraled. Then came the brutal end. In 1968, two brothers, high on drugs, showed up at his Los Angeles home. They tortured the 69-year-old Novarro for hours, believing he hid cash from his Ben-Hur glory days. He died choking on his own blood, his death sensationalized as a homo-sex murder by gossip rags. The tragedy exposed Hollywood's hypocrisy. Studios profited from his allure, but abandoned him when the spotlight dimmed. Today, Novarro's legacy is a haunting reminder of the cost of living in shadows. As film historian William Mann put it, he was a star the world adored, and a man the world refused to see. Patsy Kelly. Patsy Kelly was the brash, wisecracking sidekick in 1930s comedies. Think of her as the original Melissa McCarthy, loud, hilarious, and unapologetically herself. But Patsy had one thing McCarthy doesn't. She was openly lesbian in an era when that was career suicide. Kelly's razor-sharp wit made her a staple in Hal Roach comedies, often paired with Thelma Todd in films like Made in Hollywood. But while her on-screen persona was all slapstick and sass, off-screen, Patsy refused to play the studio's game. She lived with her partner, dancer Wilma Cox, for over 40 years, hosting raucous parties where Tallulah Bankhead might show up drunk and Clara Bow would sneak in through the back door. When gossip columnists hinted at her sexuality, Patsy shot back, "I'd rather be interesting than innocent." Her defiance cost her roles. After the Hays Code cracked down on moral decay in 1934, studios sidelined her, but Patsy didn't care. She took to Broadway, winning a Tony in the 1970s, and quipped, "Hollywood's loss is New York's trashy gain." Edward Everett Horton. You know Edward Everett Horton, that fussy, nervous guy in all the Fred Astaire movies. With his fluttering hands and comic panic, he stole scenes without even trying. But off-screen? Horton was Hollywood's worst-kept secret. The king of the oh dear reaction, Horton appeared in over 120 films, from Top Hat to The Jungle Book. But his real legacy? Throwing the most fabulous pool parties in Beverly Hills. Closeted stars like Cary Grant and Rock Hudson mingled with starlets under palm trees, while Horton played host in a silk robe, cocktail in hand. Though he never publicly acknowledged his sexuality, his long-term relationship with actor Gavin Gordon was Hollywood's worst-kept secret. When a reporter asked why he never settled down, Horton twinkled, "Why tie myself to one script when I can understudy for all the roles?" Behind the humor was a man who mastered survival in a hostile era, using laughter as both armor and camouflage. Montgomery Clift. Montgomery Clift was the brooding bad boy of 1950s cinema. With his piercing blue eyes and tortured soul, he redefined method acting. But his personal life was a roller coaster. Clift was bisexual, had affairs with both men and women, including Elizabeth Taylor, and battled addiction after a horrific car crash shattered his face. Clift's 1949 car accident, which mangled his cheekbone and erased his matinee idol looks, became a metaphor for his unraveling. He self-medicated with alcohol and pills, muttering, "I'm just a walking Freudian slip." His affair with Taylor during A Place in the Sun was passionate but doomed. She later said, "Monty loved men and women, but mostly he hated himself." By the 1960s, directors called him uninsurable, and his final film, The Defector, was a grim echo of his brilliance. When he died at 45, alone in his New York townhouse, Taylor paid his funeral costs, whispering, "He was too beautiful for this world." Cesar Romero. Cesar Romero, aka the Joker from the 1960s Batman series, was the life of every party. With his slicked-back hair and mischievous grin, he danced through Hollywood like a Cuban Fred Astaire. But romance, Romero joked, "I'm allergic to marriage." A descendant of Cuban aristocracy, Romero charmed starlets like Lucille Ball and partied with Sinatra's Rat Pack. Rumors about his sexuality swirled. He roomed with actor Tyrone Power Jr. for years, but Romero deflected with flair. "Darling, I'm a lover, not a label," he'd say, waltzing into MGM parties in a velvet jacket. Even as the Joker, he refused to shave his mustache, the crew painted over it. "I'm Caesar first, clown second," he laughed. His secret, eternal motion. "Keep dancing," he told friends. "Stop, and the world catches up." Barbara Stanwyck. Barbara Stanwyck was the ultimate tough dame, on and off screen. After a teenage marriage ended in disaster, she swore off men, saying, "I'd rather jump off a building than rely on a husband." She became a powerhouse, starring in classics like Double Indemnity and adopting a son alone in the 1950s. Stanwyck's independence was legendary. She negotiated her own contracts, as she famously said, "I don't need a man to read small print." She also performed her own stunts and mentored newcomers like Robert Wagner. The rest is no one's business. When her adopted son Dion later sued her for inheritance, she coldly quipped, "Family is a role I should have rehearsed." Yet her legacy endures, a woman who clawed her way from foster homes to 4 Oscar nominations, proving that resilience trumps romance. Tallulah Bankhead. If Hollywood had a poster child for zero fucks given, it'd be Tallulah Bankhead. The Alabama-born actress was equal parts scandal and talent, famous for her throaty laugh, nude pool parties, and declaring, "Daddy, I'm bored," mid-Broadway play. Tallulah didn't just break rules, she set them on fire. Bankhead's affairs were as wild as her performances. She seduced Greta Garbo, shared a bathtub with Joan Crawford, and telegrammed Winston Churchill, "Fancy a romp?" Her 1937 marriage to actor John Emery lasted 3 years. She called it a coma with paperwork. During World War II, she performed for troops in war zones, once quipping, "Darling, if I die, bury me in a feather boa." By the 1950s, her hedonism caught up. She hosted The Tonight Show drunk, slurring, "I'm Tallulah, darling. Everyone else is just wallpaper." George Sanders. George Sanders was the definition of a Hollywood villain, sneering, sophisticated, and dripping with sarcasm. Best known as the icy Addison DeWitt in All About Eve, Sanders brought his cynicism to real life. He married Zsa Zsa Gabor and her sister Magda, but called marriage a tedious hobby for the unimaginative. Sanders's disdain for sentimentality seeped into every role, from Rebecca's Jack Favell to The Picture of Dorian Gray's Lord Henry. Off-screen, he cultivated a persona of aristocratic boredom, once quipping, "I'm so lazy, I sometimes get into bed to think." His 1960 memoir, Memoirs of a Professional Cad, laid it bare. "I loathe humanity. I'd shoot everyone if it wouldn't mean standing in line afterward." By the 1970s, holed up in a Spanish villa, He drowned his ennui in scotch and scribbled poetry about the futility of it all. In 1972, he swallowed a bottle of barbiturates, leaving a note. "I am leaving because I am bored." Even in death, Sanders refused to drop the act. A man who turned misanthropy into high art. Dorothy Arzner. Dorothy Arzner wasn't just unmarried, she was Hollywood's only female director during the 1930s, and she did it in suits, ties, and a no-nonsense glare. While male directors filmed damsels in distress, Arzner gave us Katharine Hepburn's breakout role in Christopher Strong and invented the first boom microphone. Because why not? Arzner's career was a middle finger to the patriarchy. She directed 17 films, including Dance, Girl, Dance, a feminist take on burlesque that flopped at the time, but is now a cult classic. Off-screen, she lived openly with dancer Marion Morgan for 40 years, hosting parties where Marlene Dietrich swanned in wearing tuxedos and studio execs squirmed. When asked why she never married, Arzner snapped, "I'm too busy teaching men how to hold a camera." Her legacy? A trailblazer who outsmarted the boys' club and left the door cracked for future rebels like Ida Lupino, William Haynes. William Haynes was a matinee idol in silent films, until MGM told him to ditch his boyfriend, Jimmy Shields, and marry a starlet. Haynes's response? "I'm no actor off screen." He quit Hollywood, became an interior designer for the rich and famous, and lived with Jimmy for 50 years. Haynes's post-Hollywood life was a glittering screw you to the studios. His interior design firm catered to the elite, Carole Lombard, the Reagans, mixing Art Deco glitz with Hollywood Regency flair. He and Jimmy threw lavish parties where closeted stars like Cary Grant could relax, no masks required. When Haynes died in 1973, Jimmy couldn't bear the loss. His suicide note read, "Goodbye to all of you who tried to comfort me. I go to join Bill." Their story, once hidden, is now a testament to love's endurance in the shadows. Gloria Swanson. Gloria Swanson was silent film's glittering queen, but her personal life was a carousel of chaos. 6 marriages, countless affairs, and a pet monkey named Moses. Yet, she never truly settled down. After her last divorce in 1971, she shrugged, "Men are like hats. Try enough, and you'll find one that fits for a season." Swanson's real love? Herself. She turned down Howard Hughes's marriage proposal, saying, "I'd rather dine alone than share a menu." She launched a health food empire, and in Sunset Boulevard, basically played herself, a diva who'd rather eat caviar alone than share a hot dog with a man. Her closets brimmed with self-designed gowns, and her ego was legendary. She once fired a maid for folding her towels without sufficient reverence. By the 1970s, she'd reinvented herself as an eco-warrior, growling, "Hollywood's a relic. I'm the future." Cary Grant. Cary Grant, the man who defined debonair, had 5 wives, but rumors swirled that his true loves were men. He shared a Malibu beach house with actor Randolph Scott for 12 years, leading gossip columns to dub them the happiest couple in Hollywood. Grant's charm was a weapon. He dazzled in Bringing Up Baby and North by Northwest, but his private life was a maze of contradictions. Studio publicists planted stories of his romances with starlets, but insiders whispered about affairs with Howard Hughes and costume designer Ori Kelly. "I pretended to be someone I wanted to be," he confessed, "until I became him." Even in retirement, Grant remained an enigma, a man who perfected the art of being desired but never truly known. Marlene Dietrich. Marlene Dietrich slithered onto screens in The Blue Angel, then spent decades being Hollywood's most glamorous rebel. She wore tuxedos, flirted with JFK, and when asked if she'd ever marry, purred, "I am my own husband." Dietrich's defiance knew no bounds. During World War II, she toured Allied front lines, performing for troops in sequined gowns while smuggling anti-Nazi leaflets in her underwear. Her affairs spanned genders and continents: John Wayne, Edith Piaf, even a rumored tryst with Greta Garbo. "Romance is for amateurs," she scoffed. By the 1960s, she'd retired to a Paris apartment, holding court via phone while chain-smoking in bed. Her final words? "I'm bored," a fitting epitaph for a woman who lived entirely on her terms. Katharine Hepburn. Katharine Hepburn didn't just defy Hollywood norms. She spat on them. She wore pants, refused makeup, and had a 26-year affair with Spencer Tracy when he was married. "I'll never be a housewife," she declared. Hepburn's independence was a middle finger to the studio system. She won 4 Oscars, which is a record, played Eleanor of Aquitaine in The Lion in Winter at 61, and once told David Lean, "If you want me to cry, pay me more." Her relationship with Tracy was Hollywood's worst-kept secret. They made 9 films together, but he refused to leave his wife. "I'll never be his mistress," Hepburn lied to the press. "I'm his co-star." Off-screen, she swam nude in Tracy's pool and barked at fans who approached her Connecticut estate. When she died at 96, her will left millions to charities, not family. "I owe the public nothing," she'd say. And she meant it. Anna May Wong. Anna May Wong should have been a superstar. Instead, she became Hollywood's exotic token, a Chinese-American actress typecast as dragon ladies or doomed mistresses. Anti-miscegenation laws banned her from on-screen kisses with white actors and real-life love, just as fraught. Wong fought for better roles but was passed over for The Good Earth because the lead had to kiss a white actor. "I'm tired of dying for 1,000 years of Chinese glory," she snapped. She fled to Europe, starring in German and British films, and became a fashion icon in bias-cut gowns. Her rumored affairs with Marlene Dietrich and director Todd Browning were whispered about, but never confirmed. "Love fights me," she admitted. In 1961, she died of a heart attack at 56, her final words. "I've missed out on so much." Today she's hailed as a pioneer, a woman who clawed through racism to claim her spotlight. Liberace. Liberace was the king of kitsch, a piano virtuoso who dripped in rhinestones, furs, and candelabras. With his mile-wide grin and flamboyant capes, he sold out Vegas for decades, crooning, "Too much of a good thing is wonderful." But behind the sequins, a life of carefully crafted denial. Liberace never married, though he invented fake girlfriends to dodge rumors about his sexuality. He sued a British tabloid for calling him gay in 1956, and won. Offstage, he lived with his chauffeur and rumored lover, Scott Thorson, who later sued him for palimony. "I'm saving myself for the right woman," Liberace winked. By the 1980s, his health faltered. He died of AIDS in 1987, still insisting he was just a bachelor who loves his mama. His legacy? A glittering facade, and a cautionary tale about the cost of fame's lies. Eric Blore. Eric Blore was the sly, snooty butler in nearly every Fred Astaire Ginger Rogers film, a master of the eye roll and the muttered insult. With his clipped British accent and perpetual disdain, he stole scenes without breaking a sweat. But off-screen, Blore was Hollywood's most charming secret. A closeted gay man in an unforgiving era, Blore lived quietly with his partner, actor Clyde Cook, for 30 years. They hosted discreet tea parties for fellow LGBTQ+ stars like Clifton Webb, where gossip flowed as freely as the gin. Blore never addressed his sexuality publicly, but his wit was a weapon. When a reporter asked why he played so many butlers, he sniffed, "Because Americans can't tell the difference between a servant and a knight." He died in 1959, leaving behind a legacy of laughter, and a life lived on his own terms. Judith Anderson. Judith Anderson was Hollywood's ultimate villainess, a stage legend who terrified audiences as Mrs. Danvers in Rebecca, hissing, "You'll never be half the woman she was." Off-screen, Anderson was a fiercely private force, her personal life shrouded in mystery. Born in Australia, Anderson became a Broadway icon, earning 2 Tonys and an Oscar nod. She never married, though she lived for years with actress Benita Hume, sparking whispers of a Boston marriage. Anderson dismissed romance. "I wed my craft." In her 70s, she played a gender-bending Hamlet and quipped, I've outlived all the men who mattered. When she died at 93, her will leave her fortune to her cats. A diva to the end, Edna May Oliver. Edna May Oliver was the queen of character actors, a sharp-tongued, horse-faced scene stealer in classics like Little Women and A Tale of Two Cities. With her nasal squawk and perpetual scowl, she played spinsters, aunts, and witches, and loved every minute. Oliver married once, briefly in her 20s, then lived with her secretary, Gladys Cooper. They traveled the world, collected antiques, and threw parties where Oliver roasted guests with her wit. Men are like bad stockings, she'd say. They sag at the worst moments. When asked about her spinster roles, she cackled, "I'm not playing them, darling. I'm perfecting them." She died in 1942, leaving her estate to Cooper and a note. "Don't mourn. Laugh, you fools. Dirk Bogarde." Dirk Bogarde was the ultimate chameleon, a British heartthrob turned art house icon. He charmed audiences in fluffy 1950s comedies like Doctor in the House, then shocked them in Victim, playing a gay lawyer in the first English-language film to say the word homosexual. Off-screen, Bogarde lived with his manager, Anthony Forwood, for over 40 years. They gardened in France, wrote memoirs, and dodged tabloids. "We're just two bachelors sharing a greenhouse," Bogarde smirked. But his diaries later hinted at deeper truths. Love is a private language. He died in 1999, leaving behind a legacy of daring roles and unspoken devotion. Bogarde's career was a masterclass in reinvention. After World War II service as a combat photographer, he became Britain's boy next door in Doctor comedies, only to scorch that image in The Servant as a manipulative valet. By the 1970s, he collaborated with avant-garde directors like Visconti in Death in Venice, embodying tortured souls with haunting precision. Critics called him the thinking woman's crumpet, but Bogarde loathed fame. He fled to Provence with Forwood, restoring a crumbling farmhouse and penning best-selling memoirs that danced around their bond. Though never openly gay, Victim became his quiet rebellion. It wasn't a cause, he insisted. It was a role. Yet the film's impact was seismic. It helped decriminalize homosexuality in Britain. In his final years, Bogarde burned letters and photos, determined to control his narrative. "Memory is fiction," he wrote. "A fitting epitaph for a man who lived 1,000 lives, yet kept his truest self veiled in shadows." Louise Brooks. Louise Brooks was the original flapper rebel, a silent film siren with a jet-black bob and a disdain for Hollywood phoniness. She stunned in Pandora's Box as Lulu, a libertine who danced her way to ruin. Off-screen, Brooks was just as wild, betting Chaplin and Greta Garbo, then quitting fame to become a recluse. "Hollywood is a cesspool," she wrote. She spent her later years chain-smoking in New York, writing scathing essays about the industry that spurned her. Brooks's career began as a Ziegfeld Follies dancer, her sharp wit and sharper cheekbones landing her in fluff like the American Venus. But in Germany, director G.W. Pabst saw her as more than eye candy. He cast her as Lulu, a role that demanded raw sexuality and nihilistic charm. Critics gasped. The film flopped. Hollywood labeled her difficult after she refused to fix her iconic bob for a role. "I'd rather shave my head than play nice," she spat. By 1938, she'd abandoned acting, working briefly as a radio DJ and escort to pay rent. Her later essays, like Lulu in Hollywood, eviscerated the studio system. She mocked Mary Pickford's good girl persona and called Joan Crawford a mediocre mannequin. Friends like Tennessee Williams adored her. Ex-lovers like Chaplin called her a beautiful disaster. Yet Brooks never regretted her choices. "I traded fame for freedom," she said, chain-smoking in her dingy apartment, surrounded by unfinished manuscripts and empty gin bottles. When she died in 1985, obituaries called her a cautionary tale. Today, she's a feminist icon, a woman who burned too bright for Hollywood's cages.